In the heart of the Congo rainforest, a young biologist hears a scream that shatters the silence. But when she rushes through the dense jungle to help, what she finds is beyond anything she imagined. A giant python attacking a gorilla, and three leopards watching from the shadows. But then, in an act of pure instinct, she throws herself between them. What happens next will challenge everything we think we know about wild animals, fear, and unexpected alliances. Don't blink, because in the next few minutes, you're about to witness one of the most shocking and emotional encounters ever seen in the wild. If this story moves you, don't forget to subscribe and share. You won't believe how it ends. The heat was thick that afternoon, hanging over the treetops like steam rising from a forgotten kettle. For hours, Elise had been crouched in silence beneath the canopy, scribbling notes on the mating behavior of lowland gorillas. Her camera rested beside her, lens still fogged from the morning's humidity. She'd been tracking this troop for weeks now, at a respectful distance, documenting their patterns, their hierarchy, the soft gestures between mother and infant. And then, the jungle broke. A guttural scream erupted from the east. It wasn't a gorilla. It wasn't human either. It was something in between, raw, frantic, full of pain and fury. Elise froze. For a moment, the forest did too. Then, instinct surged. She grabbed her camera, slung her pack across her back, and ran. Vines clawed at her legs. Roots tried to trip her. Branches whipped her face, but she didn't stop. Not even when a massive paw print in the mud made her heart stall, twice the size of a man's hand. A leopard? Here? She pushed forward. It took her less than 2 minutes to find the clearing, and what she saw nearly made her fall to her knees. A massive adult gorilla was pinned to the ground, coiled in the crushing grip of a reticulated python, at least 20 feet long. Its dark, scaly body shimmered under the shafts of sunlight that broke through the trees, tightening with every desperate breath the gorilla took. The gorilla's eyes bulged, mouth open in silent agony. Elise was shaking. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't have backup. She didn't even have a radio. But something in her snapped, something deeper than fear. Then she saw them. In the shadows, just beyond the edge of the clearing, two leopards crouched, a female and a male. Their golden eyes were locked on the scene, tails twitching low in the undergrowth. They weren't hunting, they were watching, waiting. Elise didn't wait, she screamed, a full primal roar, and charged. The python flinched, loosening just enough for the gorilla to gasp. Elise grabbed the thickest stick she could find and slammed it down on the snake's back again and again, her voice hoarse with panic and rage. The jungle exploded around her, but it wasn't the gorilla that moved. It was the leopards. Elise hadn't thought about what would come next. There had been no plan, no logic, only instinct. The sound of her own heartbeat now thudded in her ears louder than any cry the forest could muster. The python hissed, its body convulsing from the blows, but it didn't retreat. Its coils remained tight around the gorilla's midsection, each movement tightening its death grip. Elise kept hitting. Her arm burned. Her breath tore in and out of her lungs, but the snake was relentless. And then, motion. From the underbrush, the leopard stepped into the clearing. Elise stumbled back, panting. Her gaze flicked between the cat's tense muscles and the python's cold, unreadable eyes. The male leopard was enormous, his rosetted coat dappled with the filtered light. The female was smaller but just as poised, elegant, deadly, silent. Elise expected them to pounce on her, but they didn't. Their focus was entirely on the python. The male let out a deep, low growl, a sound that felt more like a warning than a threat. He began circling the snake, tail lashing side to side like a pendulum ticking down to violence. The python adjusted its coils again, but the gorilla miraculously moved. Just slightly. A shallow breath. Elise's heart lurched. He was still alive. The female leopard hissed sharply and lunged. Not at Elise, not at the gorilla, at the python's midsection. The impact was fast and vicious. She sank her teeth into the snake's flesh, claws digging deep, and then sprang away as the python writhed. In that instant, the male followed, going for the exposed part of the python's body that had no leverage. The clearing erupted in motion, fur, scale, muscle, and violence, all beneath a canopy of trembling leaves. Elise could barely process what she was seeing. Leopards? Defending a gorilla? What law of the jungle had just shattered in front of her? The gorilla rolled free from the weakening coils, wheezing, trembling. Elise didn't wait. She rushed to his side, dropped to her knees, and pressed her hands against his fur to assess his wounds. No open cuts, but the bruises already darkened beneath the skin. His ribs looked intact, but he was in shock. The leopards held nothing back. They drove the python across the clearing in a flurry of slashes and snarls until the snake finally slithered off into the trees, defeated but alive. And then it was quiet again. The female leopard turned her gaze to Elise. Not hostile, not curious, just present. Their eyes locked. For a moment, it felt like time stopped. And then, just as silently as they had come, the leopards vanished into the green. Elise sat there, her fingers still trembling on the gorilla's back, and whispered, "What just happened?" But the jungle, as always, had no answer. The jungle seemed to hold its breath after the leopards disappeared. Elise didn't move for a while. The gorilla lay still beside her, his breath ragged, his body battered. But he was alive. That had to count for something. She checked his pulse again, whispering softly as if her voice might keep him anchored to this world. "You're okay. Just hang in there. We'll get help." But how? They were deep in the jungle, hours away from the nearest ranger station, and her radio was crushed in the fall, rendered useless. Her water bottle had rolled away into the underbrush during the chaos, and she had no supplies left. No medicine, just herself, a barely conscious gorilla, and the fading trail of two mysterious leopards that had defied every law of nature. She could carry him, maybe, but not far. Not over terrain this wild. And leaving him behind? Unthinkable. That's when she noticed something strange. The underbrush to her left rustled gently, too rhythmic for wind. Her body stiffened. She reached for the machete still strapped to her side, holding it tight, preparing for another threat. But it wasn't a threat. The female leopard had returned. Elise froze. She stood maybe 10 feet away, eyes locked on Elise again. She didn't growl, didn't move, just watched. Her fur glistened faintly where it was damp from the python's blood and the humidity of the forest. There was intelligence in her eyes, more than instinct, more than hunger. Then she turned and walked away. Elise blinked. The leopard stopped, turned her head slightly, waited. Was she leading her? Elise looked at the gorilla, then back at the leopard. "You want me to follow you?" No response, just a slow step forward from the cat. Elise stood, heart pounding, machete still in hand. She didn't know what kind of madness she was stepping into, but every fiber of her being told her this wasn't random. She bent down and whispered to the gorilla again. "I'll be right back. Don't move." With hesitant steps, Elise followed. The jungle was alive with sound, chirping insects, distant calls, the occasional rustle. But around the leopard, there was a strange hush, as if the forest itself respected her passage. Elise stumbled once, almost twisted her ankle, but the leopard never looked back. After what felt like 15 minutes, they arrived at a break in the foliage, a small clearing. There, beneath a wide tree, lay something Elise never expected: a cache of leaves, moss, bones, and a fresh kill. It was food, water collected in leaves, a place to rest. The leopard backed away, her gaze calm and deliberate. Elise whispered, "You brought me to a den?" But it wasn't a threat. It was a gift. For her, for the gorilla, for survival. And somewhere deep in Elise's chest, awe swelled like a rising tide. This wasn't just an animal, this was a guardian, and she had chosen to help. Elise didn't sleep that night. The gorilla rested beside her in the den the leopard had revealed, his breathing slow but steady. He was curled into the nest of moss and leaves, body trembling occasionally from pain or fever. She had cleaned the worst of his wounds with what little water she'd found and covered him with leaves to preserve warmth. But the night was long, and her thoughts restless. Across from her, under the canopy of the great fig tree, the female leopard still lingered. She didn't leave, didn't attack. She watched. Sometimes she would stand and walk slowly around the perimeter of the clearing, ears perked, alert, then return. Her mate had not returned. Elise assumed he was patrolling or gone. In this jungle, anything could happen. But what struck Elise most wasn't the leopard's presence, it was the way she seemed to accept her. Not once had the animal bared her teeth. Not once had she signaled aggression. There was no tension in her posture. Just this strange, measured watchfulness, as if Elise had passed some invisible test. When the first light of dawn pierced the trees, golden and warm, Elise stood slowly and stretched her aching limbs. Her eyes fell on the leopard, who was now lying down, paws crossed, watching her with those amber eyes that held entire forests in their depths. "Why are you still here?" Elise whispered. The leopard blinked slowly. Then something surreal happened. The cat rose, walked to the edge of the clearing, stopped, waited, just like the night before. Elise's heart quickened. She crouched beside the gorilla. "You'll be okay," she murmured, brushing a hand over his shoulder. "I'll come back, I promise." She followed again. The leopard guided her through a quieter part of the jungle this time. No thorns, fewer obstacles. The path was oddly smooth, almost maintained. She began to suspect that this wasn't her imagination, that this route had been walked before, by paws and feet. Minutes later, they reached a stream. Clear water flowed gently over smooth stones, birds chirping above in thick boughs. Elise dropped to her knees, filled her hands, drank greedily. She soaked her scarf and cleaned her arms. The jungle coated everything in sweat and filth and blood. She glanced at the leopard, who was now perched on a rock across the stream. "I owe you," she said. The leopard tilted her head. Was it possible she understood? Elise stood slowly and turned toward the path, mentally mapping it. She'd bring the gorilla here. Clean him, hydrate him. They might survive, but something beyond survival stirred in her now. She wasn't just a ranger anymore. She was part of a silent agreement, an unspoken alliance between species that weren't supposed to coexist this way. And it had all begun with one act of courage, one leap between a python and a friend. As she walked back, the leopard stayed behind, watching once more. The stream became her sanctuary. By mid-morning, Elise had managed to coax the gorilla to its edge, supporting his bulk with quiet whispers and gentle pressure. He trusted her completely now, leaning into her arms as if he understood that his life depended on her strength. His injuries still looked raw, but his breathing had stabilized, and the fever had lessened. With every slow step, Elise could feel the urgent urgency of time breathing down her neck. Predators still lurked. Danger was never far in the jungle, but for a moment they were safe, and they weren't alone. The female leopard had returned to the clearing before dawn and now followed them at a distance, her movements fluid, silent. Not once had she approached the gorilla, nor had she ever threatened Elise again. She remained close, like a sentinel. Elise couldn't shake the feeling that she was being guided, protected, watched over by something she didn't understand. As the gorilla drank and Elise cleaned his wounds again in the stream, a sudden rustle behind them made her flinch. She turned. 2 more leopards were approaching. At first, her heart froze. These were not the ones she had seen before. One was younger, barely an adult. Its movements jittery, cautious. The other was larger, broader, with a scar running down its right eye. Male, dominant. The energy changed instantly. Elise's fingers tightened around a nearby rock, purely on instinct. But the female leopard stepped forward between Elise and the newcomers. No sound came from her mouth, no growl, no hiss. She simply stood, calm, unmoving. A barrier. The dominant male stared. His body was tense, coiled with silent judgment. His eyes flicked between the gorilla, the woman, the wounded earth. And then, the unthinkable happened. He sat down. Right there in the clearing. The younger leopard followed. Elise looked from one feline to the other, heart thudding. "They're not here to hurt us," she whispered to the gorilla. It felt absurd to say aloud. But it was true. Somehow, these apex predators had chosen observation over violence, witnessing over reaction. It was as if the female had summoned them, or warned them. Elise didn't know what unspoken code of the jungle she had just become part of, but it was real. The gorilla, now resting by the water, let out a low, gravelly grunt, the kind Elise had only heard once before, a sign of comfort, not fear. The leopards didn't move. The air was thick with something ancient, something primal, not aggression, recognition. Then Elise heard it, distant branches snapping, rhythmic, heavy, humans. Her radio had long since been destroyed, but now, finally, others were coming. She could feel it. Maybe a ranger patrol. Maybe volunteers. Rescue. But part of her didn't want this fragile balance to break. She looked once more at the leopards, at the quiet solidarity forming around her and the injured gorilla. An invisible pact sealed not by blood, but by a shared defiance of instinct. Elise whispered, "You saved us." And the jungle stayed still, listening. The ranger station was silent when Zara returned. In her arms, she carried a story that had no words, only scars, tremors, and the echoes of what she had witnessed. The gorilla had survived, barely, but the look in its eyes would never be the same. Neither would hers. She kept thinking about the moment when the python had released its grip, not because of her blade, not because of her scream, but because of the intervention of the leopards. The female had lunged not at her, but at the serpent. The male had flanked the predator with precision only nature could design. It wasn't chaos, it was calculated defense. Zara had spent years studying the animal kingdom, writing papers about solitary predators, cataloging behavior, building theories. And yet, in one day, in one clearing, all her academic scaffolding had crumbled. She sat on the edge of her cot, replaying it again. The baby leopard's cry, the female's protective snarl, the male's bloodied paw, the way the python had recoiled, realizing it wasn't just facing prey, it was facing a family, a united front. But what haunted her most was what happened after. The female leopard had walked slowly toward her, not aggressively, not with fear, just curious. Zara had still been catching her breath, her limbs shaking, her hands slick with adrenaline and mud. And then the leopard had pressed its nose gently against her shoulder. No teeth, no threat, just a moment of contact between two mothers, two warriors who had defended what they loved. That night, under the thick canopy, Zara opened her journal but didn't write. Instead, she listened to the chirping insects, to the rustle of leaves, to the distant roar of a species she now understood in a different way, not just as predators, but as protectors. Months later, Zara's footage would go viral. Experts would debate it, documentaries would be made, and her name would be whispered in universities and conservation groups, but none of them would know how it really felt. Not like she did. She knew that in one impossible moment, a gorilla, a python, two leopards, and one terrified woman had rewritten the rules of the wild. And if you've made it this far into the story, maybe you felt it too. That deep, powerful truth hiding in nature, that even the most dangerous creatures are capable of courage, of compassion, of choosing to protect instead of destroy. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. These aren't just tales, they're reminders of how much we still have to learn from the wild.